My name is Abby Lee, and I'm a senior at the Moses Brown School. I use she, her pronouns. And I am one of the youth fellows at the Rhode Island Civic Learning Week. So before we start, I'd love if we could all introduce ourselves in the chat, maybe say your name, pronouns, and then any organization you're part of, if you're a student, what school you go to. Great. And as those start to come through in the chat, we're going to start talking about what the RICLC is. So thank you, Christina. Today's event is run by the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition. And the RICLC is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational coalition committed to ensuring that all Rhode Islanders, including young people such as myself, and those most marginalized from our democratic system, have equitable access to high-quality civic learning opportunities. This meeting specifically is being facilitated by our youth fellows and backed by Generation Citizen. So Generation Citizen works in states all across our country, and it is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to preparing youth for their future through robust civic education and advocacy by providing a hands-on civic learning experience. As I said, facilitated by us youth fellows, so myself, Abby Lee, in addition, Khadij Lewis, Makora, Alina Pucci, Jada Ives Williams, Kaya Prung, Lillian Johnson, and we are all Rhode Island high school and college students who help to construct meeting agendas, recruit members, and set long-term goals for our coalition. So in today's session, we're going to be having a discussion about civics with several youth activists and local elected officials in our community. And so you can see our little blurb here. After a research report conducted by the RICLC, we found that we're woefully disappointed with the status of civic learning in Rhode Island. And so during this fishbowl discussion, we want to hear from student activists and local leaders about how to address this issue, the skill gap across the state, in order to create a more informed citizenry through high quality civic education. So I hope that you're all excited about learning about how you can support the movement through joining this conversation. Before we start, we wanted to pose a couple queries to the group. So these are just questions that you can think about, no need to take notes or anything like that. But we just thought that interesting ideas might arise. So first of all, you could wonder what is similar or different about what the students are saying versus the adults. Something that's so great about the RICLC is that it is a multi-generational space. And I personally have learned a lot by being surrounded by so many people from different ages. So it'll be interesting to see how the two panels differ. Second of all, we can wonder what is similar or different about what the students are saying compared to each other. In a minute, you're going to meet our student activists, and they're going to talk a little bit about their backgrounds. So it'll be interesting to see how their experiences are different depending on the backgrounds that they come from. Third is what patterns arise correlated with the different backgrounds of the panelists. As I said, this expands beyond students to legislators as well. And I'll be curious to see if patterns arise from the identities of the panelists, or also where they come from, in accordance with our civic learning report. And finally, what can you do next to help spread civic education, and what work still needs to be done? So we really want to leave this space with plans for action and how to spread civic education. So that's great to just keep in the back of your mind while you're listening to these panels. Now, some guidelines about the actual participants in each discussion. First is one mic, one person speaks at a time. This is a little bit easier because we're on Zoom, but just if someone else is talking, make sure that you're staying on mute. If you want to add to the chat, that's a great way to not talk over someone else. Second is speaking from the I perspective. It can be easy to speak over others, but just make sure that you're using sentences only from your experience and not generalizing. This is related to the third question, analyze, don't generalize. If you're talking about quantitative data, treat it objectively and don't make sweeping generalizations that might not apply to everyone else in the group. Fourth, understand that everyone articulates differently. It can be really hard to speak in front of a lot of people, especially because we have such brave youth panelists here. So be patient and understanding and actively listen to each participant. Fifth is make sure to share airtime. So if you're someone that talks a lot, this means taking a step out of the conversation, remaining on mute and listening for a little bit. Or if you're someone who's usually more quiet, maybe go out of your shell and try and share more in the presentation. And then finally, understand that it's okay to be silent. It's a little uncomfortable to do this on Zoom. Everyone's doing this kind of for the first time. So don't be afraid to have some reflection time. Finally, as a participant, if you have a question that you would like discussed besides what is being asked, you can always drop something in the chat or send a direct message to myself, Christina, or any of the other youth fellows. I'm sorry, and I'll pass it on to Khadij and Makora to introduce our panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Makora.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to begin with the student fishbowl, and I'm just going to ask each person on the panelist to introduce yourself. You can say your name, your age, not your age, your grade, what school you go to, your organization, and we can just do it by the order that's in the list.
Okay, thank you, Khadij. Hi, everyone. My name is Athena Holloway. I use she, they pronouns. I am a senior at Classical High School, and I am also a former RCLC youth member, so excited to be back. And I also work in political education and op-eds and testimonies over at the Providence Student Union. Thank you, Lisha. And I will pass it to Avery.
I'm not sure Avery's joined just yet. If Kimberly wants to go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. I go by any pronouns. I'm a junior at Classical and I'm an LT member at Providence Student Union. And I can pass it to Lillian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy. Pronoun she, her, hers. I'm a lead organizer, part of ARISE, the Alliance of Rhode Island Southeast Asians for Education. And I'm a product of the Providence School District, and I went to Glasgow. And I'm here just to share my experience and with civic engagement, and yeah, to see how can we learn more, how can we push for civics engagement in our communities.
Thank you so much to you all for participating and being here. We're gonna pose the first question to you guys. Our first question is, give me a moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we want to do the legislators before we introduce the question? I'm just gonna pose the question. Sorry? I'm just gonna pose the question and then we can introduce our legislators, if that's all right. So our first question is, what's a memorable civics lesson that you learned? And if you don't have any, what's a civics lesson that you'd like to learn? Anybody can jump in on this one.
I can jump in. Something memorable or a civics lesson that I learned. I've never had like a formal civics course at high school, which is something that's very frustrating because it's really important for students to be able to get involved in their community and understand like what like rights you do have, like as a person who's like in Providence, or even just learning about basic things like voting. It's very hard to be prepared to go out into the real world if we're not engaged in a civics course. But I do remember having a kind of like lesson in class about like the importance of voting and using your voice. And this was in one of my history classes. And the sad thing is that it was kind of like a deviation from what we were supposed to be learning. We were supposed to be doing other things, but the teacher did think that it was important, considering like elections were going on at that time, to kind of talk to us about how much our voice really does matter in our community, in our society. And I would say that I wish that this happened more often, because I could see a lot of my peers kind of light up and get excited with the aspect of being able to be an integral part of like a battle or a community or an initiative to be able to create change that can kind of advance the inequitable standards that we do have now. So I would implore schools to possibly give more opportunities for civics courses or just conversations that involve civics to be in classes, preferably starting in high school, like starting in freshman year, but this should be introduced like as early as, like, this can even be talked about in elementary school, middle schools, but it has to be in high school, definitely in freshman year, because I experienced that conversation in like my junior year of high school.
I can go next. So throughout my time in Providence schools, I did not learn about like civics education. Like I did learn about like the three branches of government in War of 1812, but then I never had the opportunity to actually apply that information to like the real world. So what I would have appreciated as a young person is that if like if I was learning about things going on in my community and how can I make changes and use my voice to amplify those who don't really have a voice in our community. So like I joined Arise when I was a junior. So I'm very grateful for that, but also acknowledging that privilege and understanding that not everyone has access to an Arise. So um all like young people should have access to a high quality civics education and learn about what's going on in the communities and how can they use their voices to make a change.
I had a similar experience to Athena. They don't really teach us a lot about civics at all, and that should definitely change. Especially I want to like learn more about how, or just educate others on how politics does affect our lives. Even like a lot of bills get passed and we don't know anything about it, and they affect us, like especially as people of color, a part of like Providence. That yeah. So I just think that we should definitely like have more opportunities for civics learning. Like Athena said, starting in freshman year, because I didn't even know a lot of this stuff until I joined PSU in like sophomore year. And even then, that's so late, like to learn about this kind of stuff.
Thank you guys so much for those answers. Now on to our next question, which is, sorry, get my slide up. Do you usually have opportunities to share your perspective on what you desire to learn and how to be taught, how you want to be taught in your schools? If so, how?
I can go. I don't really, like as I said before, they don't really teach us about anything about civics in school. The most I've heard about politics is from my history teacher probably, and that's because he's really interested in like educating us about civics and about like how politics affects our lives. But beyond that, not really. Like they don't really talk to us about how voting matters. Yeah.
I can say at classical, it's kind of like tricky because it depends on what teacher you have and what class you have and your comfortability level with said teacher. And it's something that's kind of disheartening because as you go into the school, like as a freshman, you're kind of like adjusting, getting to know the vibe, getting to know like your classes, and you're kind of more focused on like academics. And it can be really hard to like not necessarily like challenge a teacher, but having a conversation and kind of wanting to offer a different perspective in class because the environment isn't really the best to do so. But I think as you progress on like in your journey, like as you become like junior and senior, it becomes a little bit more easy to kind of control the segue or like the conversation in class. I can say like there are times in like my psychology class where we've been talking about things and I've tried to look at it through a racial lens and make sure that it's kind of like offering a different perspective or side to like the lesson that we're learning. So I feel like there are opportunities and it's getting better, especially since the implementation of Classical's Racial Equity Committee, which I am a part of, and also Khadij and Lillian. But I think it's not something that's uniform throughout every single class. Like there are some classes where you're not going to have a conversation about anything, period. Like especially math. It's like, okay, if you're in math class, it's math class. You're not talking about how your day went or current events or anything. It's math class. And then there are other classes where it's like, okay, like anything that you want to talk about, any recent current events. Those are classes like ethnic studies, a lot of history classes, English classes. But I think it should be more normalized to incorporate all of these things to all of our courses, not just certain ones, because this is a part of our everyday life.
So for me, I went to Classical High School. I graduated in 2019, and now I'm in my 4th year at RIG. I would say throughout my time in the Providence Public School District, I did not have that many opportunities to share my perspectives on like what I wanted to learn because like I didn't know that my voice could have an impact on making changes on whatever is going on in the school community. So, and like there weren't any spaces for students to talk about what's going on in our schools. So as I think as I joined Arise in my junior and senior year, that's when I realized like there's a lot of issues going on and like I started to speak up more. But like my high school experience compared to college is very different because like when you go to college, you have the option of choosing like what major you want to go into and see if like it's a good fit for you. So the major that I'm particularly in, I do have a lot of say of like what I want to learn and what I want my roadmap to look like. So, and also like not to bash on classical, but like classical is very like traditional on like memorizing information and then like taking a standardized test and just spitting that information out instead of applying it.
I like completely agree with what Nancy said. And I feel like a kind of roadblock is that you can like try and express what you desire to learn at classical sometimes, but like you need such a huge backing to be able to do so. It can be kind of intimidating and very like discouraging to like go up to a teacher and like ask them to make a lesson plan centered around a certain topic or even like, so for example, we recently had a Black Excellence exhibition at Classical, and it was something that we at the Racial Equity Committee kind of like thought up as like for Black History Month as a kind of celebration to close it off. And we like the students had to do most of like the contacting, and that also included like talking to admin and like giving a proposal about why we think celebrating our culture and our achievements and our joy is important, which in of itself is kind of odd to do, like to kind of like come to a compromise, like, yeah, I do think you guys should like celebrate like your culture and your joy and how far you've gotten. So I think like the opportunity can be there, but for certain people, it's very hard to do so. And there are not many like supports in place to be able to help every student to use their voice as effectively as they can and as comfortably as they can, unless you have a group of like friends or teachers behind you.
Thank you guys so much for those insightful answers. You touched a little bit on the next question, but just to expand on it a little bit more, how would you like to be taught civics education? It seems like the civics education at our schools is not where we want it to be. So what is your ideal for how civics education would be taught?
Well, the word that comes to mind for me is culturally sustaining, for one, and also some type of rigor, but rigor doesn't mean a standardized test. Like it doesn't mean having a textbook and then learning a whole bunch of information in the span of a week and regurgitating it and then never touching on it again. That can mean having like action-based projects, like actually going out, exploring your community, talking to your local stakeholders, talking to your friends, talking to your teachers, something that will stick with you after like a week, something that you're not going to forget. I think civics should be something that's not even only taught in one class. Like it shouldn't just be like, okay, like this is the civics course and you're only gonna learn about civics education and everything that encompasses it in this one period of the day, because civics is a part of our everyday life and therefore it should be implemented in every subject and every course and every period of the day that we're in. But I think a good start would be kind of destigmatizing the role of like courses at school and that they can solely only be rigorous if they are comprised of standardized tests, and showing that something can be just as rigorous if we're doing a project on it and even more long lasting and can be replicated and showed to many more people for inspiration to make change in the future.
I completely agree with Athena. I also just think like offering like any opportunities, like even if it's like an after school club or just like taking up like an elective even, could be a good way to start off with civics, because they're doing nothing at classical at all about this too. So just starting like very little could benefit us a lot.
Yeah, adding on to like especially what Athena said, like so I'm also on the civics task force that was formed as a result of like this coalition pushing for um making civics education a mandatory course that all students have to take before they graduate, and is also a result of like the Cook v. Raimondo case, where a bunch of young people and community members came together to sue the state because we weren't receiving an adequate civics education. So on the civics task force, we've been meeting to see like what does this course look like if it's implemented and required by the state. Like what does each classroom look like? And a lot of our conversations um, were about making sure that it's project based and is individualized to the learner. So what that means that is like the student gets to explore whatever topic while they're learning about what's going on in the communities. And the hope is that eventually they work on this project to possibly like make an impact on their community. And also like there's no like grade, like you can't fail or there's no penalty. So while working on this project, also understanding that learning is something continuous and there's like no end goal really, and making like systemic change especially takes a lot of time. So I would like really push for civics to be taught not in a traditional sense where you were just learning about the three branches of government and who all the presidents were, or like the citizens test, but rather than making it individualized and personalized for each student.
Thank you guys for those amazing answers. Actually, those kind of relate back to our next question, which is what do you need from your educators to successfully learn civics education?
For me, I think as like the first thing is to start like having a safe space, like cultivating a safe space, and like because in the classroom there's a power dynamic. So the teacher has like power over the student in a way because they get to control like what end grade they get at the end of the semester. So what I would appreciate is if like the teachers put in trust in the students that they know what's best for them and that they can drive their own learning if they're given the space and opportunities and the resources to do so. So I think just having that safe space is an important first step, and also like shifting the power and giving young people that space and power so that they can explore what they want to do.
I definitely agree with that. To add on, I feel like support from teachers and educators for students, because every student has a different learning capacity. Like some students know more about civics than others. So I feel like just having like Nancy said, a safe space, since everybody like a lot of people are afraid to speak out against or like just talk about civics. So offering that could benefit us a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that was said. I would definitely add understanding. I feel like it's very like easy to kind of like generalize and assume a student's situation. And it's I know like being an educator, being a teacher is a very hard job, but being a student is a very hard job as well. And so many of us have so many confounding variables that affect why we may not be doing well in school or why we may need extra support. And do our families even talk to us about like voting processes or civics, or do we have to learn these things on our own through our peers and through outside organizations and through our mentors? So I think it's really important for educators to understand that and being able to kind of tailor their teaching styles to each individual student, and realizing that there are some students who have not had any prior experience learning about any of the concepts that may be in the curriculum that they have to teach. So the teachers are going to have to kind of approach this with a lot of care. And it's definitely a journey. Like it's not an easy thing to do either. But I think with communications with students in both ways, like students communicating with their teachers and vice versa, I think that we can kind of maximize the amount or the most effective way to be able to teach civic education in a manner that will stick with us after we graduate and into an adulthood, and not just like stay with us when we graduate. It won't just disappear after we graduate. We'll be able to carry it with us and use it as a kind of base or a guide to navigate our society.
I think another thing to add on, like that's very important, is that like especially being aware of like who are your students and like what's the audience, and knowing that like everyone has their own story and not putting your own bias or prejudice and um on the students or like whatever perspectives you already have coming in, um because there's a lot of like bias and prejudice that comes into like a classroom in general. So being active and intentionally working on like limiting those as much as possible. I think also, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I think also adding like understanding that like we are a different generation and we learn civics through a lot of like different outlets. So like we can see it from TikTok or other social media platforms and not just from a textbook. So
And also definitely understanding different perspectives in civics education, because I feel like everyone has said before, everyone has a different story and everyone has different experiences. So unlike classes kind of like math where it's like, okay, like you either have the right answer or you don't, or like even like in other courses as well. Like English can be more interpretive, but there are a lot of classes where like if you're doing multiple choice, there's one correct answer. But civics education, like there are so many ways in which you can interpret something and look at our society through many different critical lens. So understanding that educators may have to go through some trainings themselves to like recognize some biases that they may have, and learning with like social emotional learning, how to like responsibly connect with the student and respond to disagreements or conversations about topics that they may not have ever talked about before, because it can kind of be a shock to like jump into civics when there's a lot to unpack there, especially like the history behind it and how we've got here since like the conception of like America, and even the history of like Rhode Island that it is today. So I think it's also important for educators to first be educated themselves about what they're going to be taught, and not just kind of like thrown into it without any realistic explanation of what they're going to be teaching their students.
Thank you guys again for those wonderful answers. For our final question, which is actually going to segue into our legislator fishbowl, we want to know, what is something that you need right now from your legislators?
Oh, I have quite a few things. I think things that I think that we need from our legislators is definitely more connections to youth, because there are youth who have been like fighting this fight for like ever, like in so many like different orgs. We have so many different orgs around Providence and just in general, and we have so many like student-led groups as well that are inside of our schools, and a lot of us are doing this work on our own. Like we're doing it by ourselves. We're going home after school, taking RIPTA and writing like testimonies, or trying to like reach out to people, trying to talk to our friends about what we can do, like watching the news, just ruminating on things that we think should change in Providence. And it's kind of very hard to like connect to legislators or like community stakeholders, because it's just like a process where communication is very, very hard to get to. I feel like you can only connect with a stakeholder if you happen to be at an event, or if you happen to hear from someone else or somewhere else, or you see it in like an email from an organization that you're in. But I think there should be more of a pipeline or a connection from youth directly in schools to their legislators and to their stakeholders, so that we can directly talk to y'all. We don't have to go through so many more steps to be able to have conversations. Because one thing I have found is that in leadership, it's always the same cream of the crop people who are able to be in these opportunities, who are able to be in panels like this. I work at PSU. I work in political education. Yes, of course, I have opinions, but there are people who don't even know what PSU is, that have just as good opinions as me and have so many more words of wisdom, that don't even know about this opportunity or experience because they've never heard about it. So I think we need to have a better job of getting our local stakeholders into our schools and having more of an effort to connect with our students and youth.
I definitely agree with that, especially the part where it's like we do have to have current like youth that are in high school and give their insight to these legislators, because a lot of the time it's only adults who are allowed to speak. And a lot of youth can relate that we don't really get to have our voice like heard a lot of the times. Usually, like Athena said, it's only our organizations or like people who are like among us that listen to us and like hear our opinions on these on like civics and other things that concern us. But I do think that youth should be like just connected in any way. It doesn't really matter, but just any way to these legislators, so they hear our opinions, hear our voice, hear what we have to say about high school and like civics in high school.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the young people on this panel with what they said. I also want to emphasize that for legislators, please like make the time to connect with us, because we are doing the work on the grounds, like youth organizations. These coalitions are doing the work. So if we can work together, that'll be great. Oftentimes I feel like the work is being done in silo, because like there's just so much going on. Also with like making sure that the city has funding for civics, not only the city, but like statewide funding for civics education, because like it has been passed, the act has been passed to make civics education mandatory for students by the time they graduate high school. So now making sure that there's funding available for that so that it can be implemented with fidelity.
Yes, I agree. And just adding on to that, I would also emphasize like transparency, because again, like we do want youth connections, but we also don't want to have like empty promises of like, okay, like we're going to do all of these things, we're going to connect with y'all, we're going to make sure we have these events, and they don't happen. Because trust me, we get it that it's very hard, like being in like PPSD, like it's very hard, it's very fragmented right now, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So just being transparent and being able to do what you can, and we'll be able to work with the rest, but just any support that we know we can definitely like rely on is something that you take very seriously, because we're always looking for extra help, since we've been organizing like a lot of the times by ourselves, and the times when legislators or stakeholders do come in is usually at the very, very, very end, but we do really need that hope from the beginning.
Again, I want to say thank you guys so much for those answers. I'm going to pass it over. And I think we're going to begin the legislator fishbowl. Thank you guys again.
Hi everyone, I'm Lillian. I'll be the facilitator for the Legislative Fishbowl. So with us today, we have two legislators here with us today. We have Representative Potter and Representative Stewart. I just want to thank you both for coming and taking the time to come to the Zoom. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, can you hear me? Are you all good? My internet connection is a little wonky this afternoon. My name is Jennifer Stewart. I am the representative for the 59th district, which is in Pawtucket. It includes the neighborhoods of Oak Hill and Woodlawn. And when I'm not a member of the House, I am a history and political science teacher at Moses Brown School.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I represent District 39 in the House of Representatives, which is Exeter, Richmond, and Hopkinton. Can y'all hear me? I may be having some difficulty. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. So I represent Exeter, Richmond, and Hopkinton. I am a freshman. I have 3 kids in high school, well, 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. So I love hearing everything that you have to say. I also am a graduate of classical high school. And, you know, I'm thinking back to the civic days that I had. The best history class I took was AP US History with Mr. DeSimone. I don't know if he's still a teacher there, but that was my entry into civics. And so I can understand what you all are saying about how it certainly is lacking. So I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
And once again, I thank both of you for coming here today. So segueing into the legislative fishbowl questions, we have 5. And so the first one is, what is a memorable civics lesson that you've learned, that you've had experience with? And if none, what would you have liked to learn?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? My internet sort of, oh, I see what the question is. Thanks.
I can answer that. So the most memorable civics lesson that I learned was kind of unusual. It was 9/11. I was at classical. I was in high school, and they wouldn't let us watch TV. And everybody was wondering what is going on, what is going on. And I was actually in AP US history, and we had the most intense discussion that I think I ever had about what was happening in the Middle East. And that was probably the most memorable civics lesson I ever learned. But one of the things that I wish that we learned about in school and taught our kids in school was that um, what happens locally is what's really important, and change happens at the local level. So if you don't know who your state rep is, who your state senator is, what's happening in the state house, change will never happen. Everyone focuses so much on what happens federally, but the truth is what happens federally really, it's not going to make the change that you need in your life today. If you really want change, go to the state house and make some noise, because that's where it's going to happen first. And I wish we taught our young children that today, because when people vote, I can't tell you how many doors I knocked on. What are you running for? What does that entail? Who's our state rep now? You know, people just, they don't focus on the state level stuff, and that's the stuff that impacts your day to day. So I really wish we focused on that in our schools.
Can you hear me? Is it coming through? Okay, so I have one response to what you just raised, Megan, and that is, you know, I think part of the problem why people are so disconnected to what happens at the local level and the state level is that there's far less attention and coverage of what happens at the local and state level. And chances are that, you know, if you watch the news, etc., there's a lot of reasons why you'll probably just get exposure to the national, right? And in some ways, the national is easier, right, to get information about. Even though I agree that where you can have an impact is actually at the local and state level. And it's ironic that that's what people know the least about. I think for me, the civics lesson that I received as a student many years ago, well, I would say I didn't study any civics in high school. I got to political science, which includes civics, really through studying the history of the civil rights movement. And it wasn't really until that topic that, you know, learning about the power of the president or Congress or the role of the Supreme Court, to just talk about some of those national institutions. It wasn't until then that that really became to me.
Okay, I agree with what the both of you said. I think it's very true that there's a disconnect between the civic education that we have and normal citizens knowing like what our representatives are, which also segues really nice into the second question. As legislators, how will you guys engage the community and help schools to engage the community in order to improve the quality of our civic education?
I think that's one of the most important and most difficult things as a legislator. And it really engaging the community has been really one of the most important things that I've tried to do. So my district and every district is different. Having Exeter, Richmond, and Hopkinton very spread out district is trying to hold as many events as I can to bring the community together. So I rented out a local brewery, which it's, kids can come. It's not just beer. And we had a personal care drive for folks in our community. Just come meet your legislator, bring a bottle of shampoo, and just hang out and talk and be part of the community, engage one another, engage me, tell me what you want from me, what you're looking for, what impact I can have on your life. And trying to do more events like that in my community to engage people, get them focused on local issues. That's been one of the most difficult things, because you have to plan an event. You have to advertise it, you have to tell everyone, and then you have to do it again and again and again, to the point where they're like, all right, I'm gonna come. That's the most challenging part, is getting people engaged. I think that's the most important part as well. There was another part to that question, I apologize. What was the other part? And how do you connect with youth? I think that's also one of the hardest parts. As I said, I have two kids in high school, in the local high school, and it's kind of funny because sometimes they're like, I'm not telling anyone who my mother is. I'm not, and it's funny because they don't necessarily want to engage, especially in this climate. We have a very difficult climate, and every district is different. So in my district, there's a lot of discourse that's not always respectful, and so engaging in a way that's respectful to everyone, and talking about the issues in a way that everyone feels comfortable, that's one of the challenges that I have found.
I've been lucky enough to work with teenagers that I teach, and then those that are in the community that I don't teach, but we're able through local organizations to get them volunteering for me when I was a candidate for office, and using well, I don't want to say using, but sort of like, I found that once I was able to get one or two teenagers who were in the community connected to me when I was, for example, running for office, or currently when it comes to raising awareness about certain bills or policies, whether it's over social media, etc., that they provided great leverage for then connecting to more youth, and they were sort of like ambassadors for me as an elected official and as a political candidate, to bring more kids in. But I think the real challenge in connecting is actually time. High schoolers have a lot going on. They might have work, a full class schedule, all kinds of stuff, to be like plugged in civically. Like, people need some time to learn about the issues and get connected to each other. And that can be really difficult to find. outside of the school day.
I 100% agree. For our third question, what resources beyond academics do you believe that schools and the community should provide to support civics education?
Well, I think when kids get involved in things like debate, Model UN, mock trial, or just like a current events club, any of those things can help with some of the civics exposure and some of the skill building that is useful to be civically engaged.
I would love teachers to find an issue that the majority of young people care about. Let's say the environment, right? Because a lot of legislators are older, and y'all are going to be the ones that are going to clean up whatever messes are made today and messes that were made 50 years ago. I would love to see an issue and teachers go through the steps on how to advocate for an issue. So let's say it's, the Act on Climate passed last year. It's super important to move forward for the state of Rhode Island to teach kids, how do you testify on a bill? How do you advocate for a bill? How do you write your state rep? What are the options? How do you show up at the state house to, how do you organize that? I think that's the most important thing, is how we step forward in the future and how you do all these things, because nobody taught me that, right? And so it took a real it took a serious issue to make me learn about it, but I did it on my own. And why not give young people the tools to be able to do that so that they don't have to try to figure it out on their own? I think that's really important. I wish that was something that was taught, and that would have to be outside of school hours, obviously.
Absolutely. So, in your own personal opinions, what do you believe is one of the first steps to increasing civics engagement in the community?
Organize, organize, organize. I think that we cannot understate organizing. I think of my own community, and when I decided to run for office, I lost the first time I ran by 321 votes, and my then state rep decided that he was going to attend the events on January 6th at the Capitol. And so I thought, all right, well, I guess I'll run again. But I spent 2 years doing nothing but organizing in every spare minute of my time to make sure that we had a good, solid team in my district that were ready to work when the time came. So I think organizing is more important than anything else, whether it's organizing on a bill, organizing around a candidate, organizing around anything, building the numbers of young people together to this group. I mean, you have 27 people engaged right now on this Zoom call. There are some organizations that have been together for years and years that can't put 27 people together. I mean, it's incredible what you have done here, and continue to build on that. You'll be a force that no one will want to mess with.
Sorry, my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I think the first step for civics engagement is really for teachers to have some courage to find out what students care about, and to start to incorporate more of that into classroom conversations. And some of that also can require students, given that there's a basic rapport there, to also be willing to take a chance and express some of the things that they're concerned. I can, I have some idea of what my students will likely connect to and what they likely will want to know about. I can present those things to my students to see if that actually is the case, right? And you know, being willing to adjust accordingly. So I think the first step is really just being willing to do something with the platform that you have.
Okay, and that was our last question. I still want to thank the two of you for coming on and answering all these questions and taking the time out of your day. We really appreciate that. I would also like to invite the audience to ask questions to either our youth participants or our legislators. If you guys have any questions you would like to ask them.
I have a question for our youth. So as a GC program manager who coaches teachers who are engaging students in civic action projects for the first time, a lot of what I hear as teachers are grappling with their fear of the unknown. In doing that, because it is scary to, if you've never led a student-led civic action project, you're like, that's terrifying. And a lot of them will be like, I just wish this was in senior year, right? I wish it wasn't in 8th grade or 9th grade or 10th grade. It should be when they're about to vote, because that's when it's most relevant. But I think all of you said something to the effect of sophomore year isn't soon enough. I wish I learned this before I got to high school, or at least at the latest at freshman year. So I'm curious what you would say if you were in the room with me when you heard a teacher say, I wish that I was doing this project with seniors, because then I would feel more confident about going into it and I would know that they're getting something out of it.
Yeah, I would implore the educator to kind of do a bit of introspection and ruminate about why senior year would be the year to start learning about your community when you're, some people are 18 senior year and about to become an adult. So to just start learning about that is something that seems a bit illogical, and we do understand that it can be very hard, very daunting, and very scary, but it's also a two-way street. Students can also be very scared to like participate in this because they may have never had a civics course before and they may not know anything about their community. So it's definitely a two-way street, and being able to work together through it, I think, is what makes it such more of a better process. Like students and teachers working together and being like, hey, like this was actually a hard course, but like we got through it and we got through the end of the year and we had fun together learning as well. Just because someone is an educator doesn't mean that they necessarily have to know 100% all the time what they're teaching, as long as they are open-minded and are actively looking to be the best educator that they can be. It's completely fine to be able to learn along the way with your students as well.
Are there any other questions that anybody wants to ask before I give it to our next facilitators?
Actually, I have a question. So as I was listening to the legislative fishbowl panel portion, I did pick up on a quote that we're here to like clean up the messes that were made today and that have happened 50 years ago, and that this work would also have to be done after school. I just have the question to challenge why youth would be cleaning up the messes of why are we cleaning up the messes? Do you think it should be more of a youth-led process solely, or do you think it is also in part of the stakeholders who are in our community to also help clean up this mess that has been made while we are here?
That's a great question. Thank you. I guess I was referring to really you are going to outlive most of the folks that are making the decisions today. So you look at federally, you know, the majority, I think the average age of senators that are elected right now is like 65 or something like that. We need more youth to step up and run for office. But I guess what I meant to say was the decisions that are made today, unfortunately, impact your future for tomorrow. And all the horrible decisions that have been made over the last 50 years that negatively impact our environment, it's going to impact your future much more than it'll impact some elected officials today. I'm not that old, so I'm right there with you. But the point that I was really trying to make is that the future belongs to you. And so really picking up this gauntlet and running with it is so important. And the more youth that we have that can do that, the better off we are. I'm a millennial, and I feel like my entire generation has been asleep for the last ever. You know, you very rarely see millennials getting up to do something, and it's frustrating, and it's so encouraging to see, like I said, 30 people on a call that are ready for action and ready for change. And so I guess I didn't mean you have to clean it up, but that really it's your future, and challenge your elected officials to do the right thing for you.
All
I
right.
just want okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just also add that, you know, there's like the short term and the long term. And, you know, there's like the way the system is supposed to work, and then there's the way the system actually does work. And there's a lot that's, you know, decided politically in the short term that might be beneficial to a few people, but is actually really bad for the most in the long term. And the problem is that a lot of our political system is not doesn't encourage the long-term view. It encourages a lot of short-term gain. And so I think that that's, you know, also part of the reason that my colleague Megan is talking about having to clean up messes, because, you know, when let's say the mess of the environment really comes to pass, the people who helped the people who made the decisions that landed us in hot water in the long term will likely not still be in positions to be held accountable. And so, you know, there's all kinds of ways in which our system, I think, is set up to discourage people from getting involved. And so I think it's a real, I don't know, testament to, you know, to you all that, you know, you won't let that stop you. And, you know, it's good to connect with other people who won't let that stop them, so you can support each other in trying to move forward, because our system is not an easy one to get involved in and stay involved in. So that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing, everybody that shared. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next section, so I'm going to pass it to Alina and Kaya.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to do a really quick debrief of what was just talked about. So in breakout rooms, we're going to be reflecting these questions. What are our opinions on the discussions and what did we learn? What is one thing that you agreed with? What is one thing you disagreed with that was said? If you don't have a disagree, that's great. Just talk about something that maybe you think could have been clarified a little bit more. What is one solution that you heard between the two groups? And did you hear anything in the fishbowl that surprised you or took you aback? So yeah, Christina, if you wouldn't mind making those breakout rooms and we can go and talk. Okay, so I think everyone's back from the debrief. Kaya and I created a feedback form that I'm quickly going to post in the chat. If you guys wouldn't mind filling it out, we'd love to hear your opinions on how this went, something that we might be able to do for next time. We also have our Instagram and social media there. If you're interested in becoming a youth fellow, please reach out to us. So I'll just give you guys a couple of minutes to fill this out. If you're interested, we would greatly appreciate it. Okay, guys, if you filled that out, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. So I'm just gonna say some final statements. So thank you so much for joining us for our session today. We sincerely hope that by watching the fishbowl and reflecting with others that you gained a new perspective on civic education and have begun to understand the importance of civics education for all students in Rhode Island. Generation Citizen is continuously working on advocating for civics education for Rhode Island students, and we're very glad that we had you today. If you're interested in becoming a youth fellow for Generation Citizen, please don't hesitate to contact us. Applications, I believe, begin in August to September, and if you're chosen, you'll be able to put together events just like this one. And we really enjoyed putting this together for you guys. We really hope you enjoyed watching, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you.